tonight, pay close attention. We shall venture deep into the heart of the continent to confront an enemy older than all kingdoms, a minute predator that has stalked mankind for millennia. You might imagine this to be a violent affliction, a care-minus-gut battle with fever and chills, but the reality is far more terrifying. It is a slow, silent theft of the very soul. The truth is, should you fall prey to this affliction, the greatest foe is not the fever or the beast, but somnolence, that simple, alluring call of slumber itself. So before you unwind, spare a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely cherish my work. Leave your time zone and location in the comments. I'm always amazed by the global audience joining us. Place your phone face down. Turn down the volume. Now begins. Before maps were born, before empires carved the earth with straight lines, this continent had its own borders, its own kingdoms of invisible power. They were not defined by rivers or mountains, though they often followed their course, but by a sound, a low and long, persistent hum. These fly belts stretch across Africa's heartland, stretching from the scorching west coast to the Great Lakes region in the east, and deep into the humid southern jungles. To live here was to dwell within the domain of a tiny, unseen ruler. Within these fly belts, people carried a peculiar sorrow, a slow spreading dread, for which no name existed in European languages, yet possessed 1,000 indigenous names: winter sickness, slumber sickness, the wasting curse. It seemed to rise from the damp riverbanks, spreading from the dappled shade of the savanna trees, where cattle have perished for generations, wisdom unwritten in texts, yet etched into the earthened elders' memories. At midday's fiercest heat, one must avoid certain valleys or thickets near river crossings. These are not superstition, but survival codes written in lost tongues. Travelers on the trade routes bear witness. 2 villages, once steaming, now silent and desolate. Clay walls crumbled back to earth. In one household, the talkative uncle grew silent, then sombre, finally vanished without trace. He would stare into emptiness for hours, ultimately falling into a sleep from which he never awoke. This affliction does not strike like a lion to end life, but lurks like a thief. It consumes a person's being. Inch by inch, it steals vitality, warmth, and character. The cheerful mother grows irritable and bewildered. The sturdy farmer can no longer lift his hoe. The body wastes away, but the true horror lies in the theft of the soul. The self slowly grinds to a hollow shell. The last breaths grown in the jungles of the Congo basin. Some call it the spirit of malice. I water spirit mischief. A spirit, enraged by some injustice, possesses and devours souls. The witch doctor drives out the intruder with herbs and incantations. Sometimes it seems to work. The initial fever subsides. The headaches fade. Relief was laid among the kin. Yet the curse lurked, undisturbed, gathering strength in the body's dark rivers, biding its time to launch the final assault upon the mind's fortress. It paints the map of fear, determining where men may dwell, where fields may be tilled, how many goats or sheep may graze. The great humped zebu, a symbol of wealth elsewhere. Here it is nowhere to be seen. The mount of northern kings and conquerors, the horde, cannot survive a single season south of a certain line. This invisible barrier, this living frontier, deeply shapes the social fabric. It keeps the population sparse, settlements scattered, makes large scale cultivation possible only by hand, renders wealth accumulation through livestock impossible. The fly belt, like a fortress, its guardians are not soldiers but insects and the spectres they carry. The hum in the air is the very sound of the frontier being defended. This silent biological war has raged for generations, until the first outsider gave this curse a scientific name. But this curse is no spectre, no ghost nor the wrath of ancestors. It is a living presence, a creature so small it defies belief, yet harboring terrifying ambition. microminus sailors navigating the human bloodstream. Its name Trypanosomiasisexplained, a single minus-celled protozoan, structure simple yet deadly, a transparent spindle, like a fragment of life, tapered at both ends, possessing but a single whip minus-like tail, propelled by the helical thrust of its flagellum, a master swimmer born of the fluid world. Its entire life cycle a cycle of invasion and escape. Their journey commences not within humans, but within insect intestines, when tsetse flies ingest blood from infected animals or human. These minute travelers are drawn into the fly's mict. Here, the parasites undergo metamorphosis and multiply, altering form to prepare for the next stage of their odyssey, swimming against the flow of digestive fluids, migrating upwards from the gut to the fly's salivary glands, where they complete their metamorphosis, becoming stouter in form, and, crucially, acquiring infectivity. They transform into a silent army, crowding within the host's glands, awaiting their moment to spread. They cause no harm to the fly, merely transient passengers aboard a living vessel. When the fly's mouthparts pierce once more, the moment arrives. With brutal, efficient precision, the fly's mouthparts are not mosquito minus like fine needles, but serrated blades, like miniature chainsaws, sawing through skin to form pools of blood, for them to lap up. While feeding, they inject saliva. This anticoagulate keeps the blood flowing. As saliva floods the wound, the dormant army launches its assault. Thousands of trypanosomiasis are washed into the wound. A new wave of invasion commences. Initially, they lurk within the tissue. At the bite site, they multiply voraciously, forming a hard, red ulcer, a nodule. This becomes their bridgehead. From here, the invaders surge into the lymphatic system, then invade the bloodstream. The human immune system, that formidable defense force, immediately sounds the alarm, identifying the intruders through the parasite's distinctive protein shell. It begins producing specialist antibodies to eliminate them. A massive counterattack unfolds. A wave of antibodies sweeps through the body. Billions of trypanosomiasis are utterly eradicated. The fever subsides. The pain dissipates. The defenders appear victorious. Yet this parasite is a master of deception, a master strategist of biological warfare, a minuscule fraction of the invading force, perhaps as little as 1%, undergoes a remarkable transformation before the immune assault. They change their outer garments, shedding their original surface proteins. From a vast genetic library boasting thousands of variants, they assemble entirely new protein combinations. This is perfect camouflage. Antibodies once precisely targeted at the old proteins now pose no threat to these newly disguised survivors. As the immune system kills the remnants of the old generation, the survivors multiply once more, returning to the bloodstream with a fresh cohort of invaders clad in identical new uniform. The fever returns with renewed intensity. Headaches like hammer blows, limb spasm. The immune system adapts again, identifying the new disguise, producing new antibodies, launching a devastating assault. Most trypanosomiasis are eliminated, yet a few have completed their second transformation. Anticipating this assault, the parasites cycle endlessly growing, revealing themselves, being destroyed, disguising themselves. This cycle can persist for months or even years. Each wave of parasites triggers high fever. Each immune response brings brief respite. The victim is trapped in an endless war of attrition. The body becomes a battlefield. The immune system is drained by that elusive spectre it can never quite grasp. This constitutes the first phase, the hematolymphatic stage, a war for blood. Yet the parasite harbors an ultimate objective. It targets the sanctuary beyond the reach of the immune system's heavy artillery, the central nervous system. Through mechanisms that still baffle us, the parasite breaches the blood-brain barrier, this tightly woven cellular wall, a formidable defense against toxins and pathogens, the body's most formidable defensive structure. Yet this single celled swimmer finds a way through this barrier, slithering silently into the intercellular spaces, like a silent infiltrator breaching a fortress gate. Once within the cerebrospinous fluid, it enters a privileged realm, largely immune to the body's patrolling defenses. In this clear fluid permeating brain and spinal cord, it begins its most terrifying destruction. The parasite itself does not devour brain cells. Its harm is more insidious and more cruel. Its presence triggers a sustained, large-scale inflammatory response. Immune cells within the brain launch a frenzied assault, releasing a torrent of chemical signals to combat the infection. Yet within the confined space of the cranial cavity, this persistent chemical storm becomes profoundly toxic. It disrupts the brain's intricate architecture, interfering with the synthesis of brain chemicals that govern emotion, drive, and thought. Most fatally, it assaults the hypothalamus, the brain's masterclock, which governs fundamental life rhythms, the sleep-wake cycle. The result is descent into an unstoppable abyss of chaos. Patients undergo personality distortion, experiencing manic and aggressive episodes, followed by profound sadness and numbness. Speech becomes slurred, movements clumsy, with complete loss of temporal orientation. Day and night invert. When lucid, consciousness is veiled by a neuromerical fog. What follows is not restful sleep, but an inescapable, profound lethargy, gradually descending into coma. The body, scarred by a protracted war, ultimately collapses entirely. Consciousness drowns in the inflammatory storm. This harrowing journey unfolds at two speeds, two closely linked, yet distinct killers, lurking silently within the humid forests and river systems. The body, exhausted from prolonged conflict, finally collapses. Consciousness, drowned in the inflammatory storm, has long departed. This harrowing journey unfolds at two speeds, within the humid forests and rivers of West and Central Africa. Two closely linked yet distinct killers. The primary parasite, trypanosomiasisexplained, is a chronic assassin. Initial symptoms are mild and recurrent, easily misdiagnosed as malaria or ordinary fatigue. This parasite multiplies stealthily like a lurker, masterfully manipulating its changing cycles to keep the immune system perpetually unbalanced, yet not overwhelmed. It can lie dormant in the blood for a long time before invading the brain. This slow, creeping invasion is precisely what gives sleeping sickness its name. That is the gradual, season season fading into nothingness. Yet in the arid savannas and woodlands of eastern southern Africa, another predator prowls. This is the domain of Trypanosomiasisexplained. This parasite is a fierce, acute hunter, primarily paras. It is in antelopes, bushbucks, wild cattle, and other wildlife. Its sleep to humans is often swift and brutal. The progression of infection is chilling. Ulceration at the bite site is more pronounced. Fever is more intense. Organ damage is more severe. The first stage may last mere weeks rather than years. Weeks, the assault on the central nervous system is swift and fierce. Neurological decline is not a gradual fading, but a catastrophic collapse. Death may come within months, sometimes even before the classic symptoms of lethargy fully manifest. The Congo strain is a slow-acting poisoner, a spectre that gradually saps your strength. The Rhodesian strain is a charging lion, a raging torrent that tears its prey apart, yet both are transported by the same ferryman. This microscopic navigator, however masterful in its biological art, is utterly dependent on its partner. It cannot traverse the inch of air between victims, unless it possesses a highly specialist vehicle. It requires a winged assassin. This partner's name is widely known in tsetse-infested zones, the tsetseflydisease. To the untrained eye, it resembles an ordinary housefly. Yet it is the perfect vessel of biological specialization, a container tailor-made for the parasite. Over 20 species of tsetse flies, each adapt to specific regions, yet share a deadly trait. When you spot it perched on a twig or blade of grass, you can recognize it. It folds its wings like closed scissors, layer upon layer, carving intricate patterns upon the transparent membrane. When it rests on a branch or blade of grass, it folds its wings like closed scissors, layer upon layer. Each transparent wing membrane bears unique engravings, veins like a butcher's cleaver or axe, for millions of creatures. This mark signifies disease and death. Unlike mosquitoes, tsetse flies reproduce not with frenzied chaos. They do not lay hundreds of eggs hoping for a few survivors. Instead, they adopt a strategy of quantity over quantity. This reproductive cycle bears a curious resemblance to that of mammals among insects. The female tsetse fly is inseminated only once in her lifetime. She stores the male semen to produce the offspring required for her entire lifespan. She does not lay eggs. Instead, she incubates a single egg within her body. The larva develops within the uterus, nourished for approximately 9 days by specialist glands, secreting a milky substance. The larva undergoes 3 developmental stages within the mother's body, eventually approaching the size of an adult. Upon maturity, the female seeks areas of loose, dry soil, often beneath tree shade or in rock crevices, and commences oviposition, milky substance. The larva undergoes 3 developmental stages within the mother, ultimately approaching adult size. When the time is ripe, the female locates patches of soft, dry earth, frequently beneath tree canopy or fallen timber, and deposits this wriggling, fully developed larva. Newly hatched larvae possess a pale complexion and supple form, driven solely by instinct. They immediately burrow into the soil to evade heat and predators. Within an hour, the larvae's soft cuticle hardens and darkens, gradually turning black, forming a protective outer shell known as a pupal case. This casing resembles a dark seed pod. Inside, metamorphosis is completed in approximately a month. The miracle of the adult fly's emergence is thus born. The famished new fly emerges from its shell and takes flight. This slow and meticulous life cycle prevents tsetse fly populations from exploding like mosquitoes, yet it also ensures each fly is a tenacious, long-lived apex predator. They are predators through and through, regardless of sex. Tsetse flies feed exclusively on blood alone. They are active by day, a persistent menace in the scorching heat. As visual hunters, they are drawn more readily to movement and large, dark moving objects, rather than scent. Herds of buffalo, solitary antelope, farmers heading to the fields, porters on the trail, all become irresistible targets. They are equally attracted by the carbon dioxide exhaled by their prey, locking onto the very essence of life. Their flight is swift and agile, yet they often hunt stealthily, silently trailing their prey, before finally alighting softly, alighting gently upon the skin, their presence only detected at the moment of the bite. And this is no polite nibble. The fly's mouth parts are in fact a rigid piercing organ, studded with minute serrated teeth. Upon landing, it tenses its legs, driving the sharp instrument deep into the flesh, anchoring itself firmly, then swaying back and forth, tearing capillaries and tissue, forming a pool of blood beneath the skin, from which it drinks its fill. The injected saliva contains chemicals that coagulate the blood and numb pain, allowing the mosquito to feed undisturbed for several minutes. It is precisely this violent exchange, this moment of forced blood donation, known as parasites leap from the mosquito's glands into a new host. The habitat of tsetse flies delineates the distribution map of sleeping sickness. They do not appear in deserts or frigid mountain ranges, requiring instead the sheltered, humid cover of woodlands. They congregate along riverbanks and lakeshores, lurking within dense thickets that traverse grasslands. These sources sustaining human and animal life become deadly peril zones. Drawing water, fishing, washing clothes by the river. These everyday acts become gambles. The tsetse fly acts as a gatekeeper, its presence rendering vast fertile lands uninhabitable or perilous. In the world it creates, the safest villages are often built on open plains, far from the cool shelter of tree shade. This remains an eternal balancing act between resource need and safety requirements. Amidst the ceaseless humming, the tsetse fly is not merely a disease vector, but a force of nature, an ecological engine shaping continental history, feeding on livestock, particularly cattle. It created what early European explorers termed the third inland barrier. Beyond rugged terrain and local resistance, the tsetse fly stands as a guardian of the wilderness, blocking the complete transformation of grasslands into pastures, preserving the integrity of vast ecosystems. The third inland barrier, described by European explorers, a hindrance standing alongside rugged terrain and local resistance. In a sense, the tsetse fly stands as the wilderness's guardian, preventing the large-scale conversion of grasslands into pastures, protecting vast ecosystems from overgrazing, ensuring much of Africa remained wildlife territory for centuries. In this world, parasites dwell within ancient host animals, biding their time until flies become the bridge to the human world. These miniature assassins, armed with X-like wings and mouth-like proboscis, are not merely pests, but creators and destroyers of kingdoms, silent arbiters of life and death, thereby Tinjek's mind-stealing parasites, leaving only wandering souls. In the mid-19th century, as European powers gazed upon maps of Africa, they saw nothing but blank spaces, outlines, coastlines, and vast, silent hinterlands. They dubbed it the Dark Continent, yet for millions, inhabiting vibrant kingdoms and societies, this land was neither dark nor silent, but to decision-makers in London, Paris and Brussels, it was spoils to be conquered, a puzzle to be solved. Thus they dispatched agents, those explorers of extraordinary endurance yet often haughty hearts, set forth to fill the blank spaces with place names, rivers, and potential resources. Men like David Livingstone and Henry Morton Stanley. They journeyed for glory, to seek the source of the Nile. They carried Bibles and rifles, sextants and quinine, convinced they were prepared for the continent's challenges, the scorching heat, hostile kingdoms, familiar malaria. But what they were unprepared to face were things no medicine could name, the ghosts haunting shady riverbanks and dappled woods, and the soul-devouring weariness. Scottish missionary and physician David Livingstone spent 30 years traversing the continent. He was a meticulous observer, recording flora, geography, and the customs of encountered tribes in a notebook. He repeatedly documented the tsetse flies he witnessed, the stark, cruel link between their bites and the death of transported livestock. He termed this affliction animal sleeping sickness, watching helplessly as cattle and horses, the beasts sustaining his journey, gradually weakened and perished, growing ever more emaciated until death. With suffocating precision, he mapped the distribution of the tsetse belt, fully aware that entering this zone with livestock was to sign a death warrant. He understood these flies were economic assassins, a barrier to cultivation and transport. Yet the crucial final link remained elusive. He witnessed the profound lethargy afflicting local inhabitants, a condition long familiar to the people, but he attributed it to the common catalogue of tropical ailments: malaria, dysentery, malnutrition. His final years mirrored this decline. Energy was slowly and utterly drained away. He ultimately became a walking skeleton, carried by his faithful companions, Susie and Chuma. Africa consumed him, yet perhaps it was not merely fever and exhaustion. Ghosts may have journeyed with him too. His diaries and companions' accounts abound with tales of porters and guides succumbing to a strange, despairing lethargy. Men once as strong as oxen gradually fell behind on the march. Once seated to rest, they could scarcely rise again. Their dispositions abruptly changed. The cheerful grew sullen and taciturn. The sharp-witted became dull and bewildered. They would fall asleep mid-conversation or during meals. For European expedition leaders tempered by the strict industrial discipline of the Victorian era, this was often incomprehensible. They viewed it as laziness, character flaws, and moral weakness. Rebukes, threats, and punishments followed in quick succession. They could not comprehend the very beings they were railing against, whose brains were being slowly devoured. Then came Henry Morton Stanley. If Livingstone was a saintly explorer, Stanley was a pragmatic man of action. His will was as unyielding as brute force. This master of logistics became famous for his phrase, "I presume it is Dr. Livingstone." His journey was also notorious for its brutal conduct. In 1896, he embarked upon his most ambitious and disastrous expedition, the Shah mission, aimed at liberating the German colonial governor trapped in southern Sudan. Stanley always favored grand gestures, opting for the most direct, yet perilous route, upstream along the Congo River, through the dense, sprawling Ituri forest, a region then now known as the heart of tsetse flies. Stanley's expedition embodied industrial might, a small army of nearly 1,000 men, carrying dismantled steamboats, ammunition boxes and machine guns. This force was the vanguard of empire. Yet the forest yielded not to industrial might. The humid air hung thick as felt, saturated with the hum of insects, among them that tsetse fly. The expedition swiftly descended into a nightmare, not of bloody battle, but of slow, agonizing attrition. Men began to fall ill. Stanley's diary meticulously chronicled the expedition's collapse. He recorded the men's descent into a gloomy lethargy, describing their unprecedented lethargy, recounting porters abandoning supplies mid-March, refusing to move, their eyes glazed over. He ordered them flogged, driven forward, yet failed to recognize the true enemy. This was not a pathogen erupting like cholera, but a thief, stealing strength at a dreamlike pace, then claiming the mind, ultimately draining life itself. The rear detachment bearing most provisions disintegrated entirely. When Stanley finally turned back, he witnessed a scene of utter despair. The camp littered with the dead and dying, the sick too weak to eat, lost in waking nightmare, beyond all hope of survival. This Pasha-esque expedition, symbolizing European strength and resolve, was not defeated by warriors or torrents, but by insects and the minute parasites they carried. As the party staggered out of the forest, it had become a fragmented funeral procession, having lost hundreds of men. Though Stanley charted the river, the flies that guarded its waters nearly claimed his life and the entire expedition. These explorers were like canaries in a coal mine. The mysterious slumbering sickness they brought back could paralyze an entire expedition. That eerie numbness could drain an entire army. The tragic fate served as a warning. As European powers prepared to carve up the African continent, the land's ancient inhabitants launched a counterattack with efficiency beyond the reach of any human army. The spectre bided its time, and the time would come. Late 19th century. The explorers' warnings were ignored. The scramble for Africa was in full swing. When the Berlin Conference drew borders on maps, it paid no heed to local peoples' cultures or ecosystems. Colonial officials, soldiers, and merchants followed the explorers' footsteps, seeking to profit from the new territories. They imposed order by force, built infrastructure, plundered resources. This action unleashed a long-dormant scourge from the continent's somber ecological equilibrium into a conflagration that swept across the land. They created the conditions for the great mortality. For centuries, African societies coexisted with the tsetse fly. This was not peaceful cohabitation, but one founded upon profound knowledge of the landscape. People understood the fly swarm's activity zones, knew which woodlands to avoid, and which riverbanks harbored hidden dangers at specific times. They adapted their lifestyles, grazing patterns, and settlements to accommodate the fly's presence. This was a fragile, unspoken pact between humans and insects. Colonialism tore this pact to shreds. The continent's new masters saw only inefficiency, sparse population across vast, fertile land, declaring them wasteland. They failed to grasp the profound significance of this emptiness. This was flight territory. Colonization was fundamentally a migration project, building railways, operating plantations, mining resources. Colonial powers required labor. Thus commenced an unprecedented mass migration. Entire villages were forcibly relocated. Men were conscripted from their homelands to trek hundreds of miles to labor in foreign lands. These human migration currents became conduits for parasites. Highlanders from tsetse-free regions were dispatched to rubber plantations deep within the flybelt. Within months, infection could take hold. Whether repatriated or fleeing their new homes, they would return to their native communities, carrying the trypanosomiasis in their blood, should tsetse flies exist locally. Even species traditionally feeding only on animals, a new cycle of human transmission commences. Colonies are connecting previously unconnected populations with terrifying efficiency, blending infected and uninfected individuals. They effectively fulfill the parasite's mission of dissemination. The most horrifying example unfolded in the Congo Basin. This was not a colony in the traditional sense, but the private domain of King Leopold I of Belgium. His Congo Free State was a brutal machine, existing for a singular purpose: the plunder of rubber and ivory. His agents infrastructure quotas through mutilation and murder. The reign of terror precipitated total chaos. Entire communities fled their homelands, abandoning villages and farmlands, hiding deep within the forest interior. Precisely where tsetse flies lurk, these parasite miners, carrying refugees, spread malaria to new territories. The social structures that had previously contained the epidemic collapsed entirely. From the 1890s to the early 1900s, an apocalyptic plague swept across the Congo Basin. Sleeping sickness spread like an army of specters. Reports from missionaries and a few conscientious colonial officials were chilling. They described entire regions laid utterly waste. Navigating the Congo River, villages fell into eerie, successive silences. Steamboats were moored, and as they passed through clusters of huts, only the dead and dying were seen. The terminally ill lay comatose in their homes, emaciated, plunged into final unconsciousness. In some areas, mortality rates reached 80 to 90%. Centuries miners sold river trade networks collapsed. Canoes lay idle. Farmlands lay fallow. In 1906, a traveler described a 150-mile journey through this once densely populated region, without encountering a single living soul. The land had become a realm of the dead. The exact figures are impossible to ascertain. Yet, in the Congo Basin alone, at least 500,000 perished. The actual toll likely far exceeded this figure. This catastrophe, intertwined with Leopold's tyranny, became one of a series of disasters devastating the region, permanently altering the landscape. While the plague's flames continued to spread, at the turn of the 20th century, the epidemic reached the shores of Lake Victoria, most severely affecting what is now Uganda. The lakeshore had once been a paradise on earth. Fertile soil, abundant fish, trade and culture flourished here. Residents built a highly developed society, yet the dense vegetation also provided an ideal habitat for tsetse flies. When new trade routes connecting the lake region to the Congo opened, trypanosomiasis invaded, like throwing a match into a powder keg. The epidemic erupted between 1901 and 1905. Estimates indicate approximately 250,000 Ugandans perished from sleeping sickness, out of a national population of roughly 3.5 million. In the hardest hit northern shore region, 2-3 of the inhabitants were lost. Faced with the imminent collapse of their new protectorate, British colonial authorities descended into panic. Their response measures appeared, in some respects, extreme and brutal, possessing neither cure nor medication. Their sole weapon was mass quarantine. Orders were issued to completely evacuate the lake shores and surrounding islands. Tens of thousands were forcibly expelled from ancestral lands. Homes were burned behind them to prevent return. They were relocated to regions distant from tsetse flies. Wide buffer zones were established along the lake, isolating humans from the water. This constituted a stunning declaration of defeat. The mightiest empire on earth, Great Britain, had been defeated by insects. Retreat was the only option. For decades, the fertile shores of Lake Victoria, once a cradle of life, now lay silent and desolate, a colossal monument to the power of parasites. This great plague rewrote the map of Africa, rendering vast regions uninhabitable. Social structures disintegrated, leaving generations with inherited trauma and loss. The spectre had revealed its true power, and the colonial project that unleashed it now faced the threat of self-destruction. Without people, the empire could not function. Yet the people were vanishing into eternal slumber. The scale of catastrophe in Uganda and the Congo finally compelled the colonial powers to acknowledge an existential crisis. This was not merely a local health issue, but a crisis capable of undermining the entire colonial enterprise. The dead pay no taxes. Sleeping labor cannot work the plantations. The European powers that once viewed Africa as a theater of conquest and resource plunder were now being defeated by microscopic organisms. The situation demanded urgent answers. The only field capable of providing them lay in the emerging science of the fledgling discipline of tropical medicine. The quest to uncover the phantom's cause had formally begun. This was a race against time, a desperate hunt for a deadly pathogen, a scientific detective drama unfolding in makeshift laboratories deep within Africa. At the heart of this story, the man who ultimately gave the spectre a name and a fate was a temperamental yet tenacious Scottish pathologist, Sir David Bruce, a colonel in the Royal Army Medical Corps, a servant of the Empire. His true master was the scientific method, rigorous, patient, and brilliant. His first encounter with trypanosomiasis was not in humans, but in cattle. In 1894, he was dispatched to the Zulu region of southern Africa to investigate a mysterious disease called enagana, which was decimating the colonist livestock. The local Zulu people knew the cause, pointed to tsetse flies, and knew precisely where the flies bred, and that cattle could not avoid them. European colonists remained skeptical, blaming poisonous grass or poor fodder. Yet Bruce heeded their warning. With the assistance of his wife Mary, a skilled microbiologist, he set up a makeshift laboratory to conduct research. Through a series of ingenious experiments, he mapped the transmission of rinderpest, discovering its spread perfectly matched the distribution of tsetse flies. He dissected fly carcasses, collected blood from diseased cattle, and under the microscope witnessed these tiny, writhing spiral-shaped organisms navigating between red blood cells. He named this microorganism Trypanosomiasisexplained. Subsequently, in a decisive experiment, he introduced healthy horses into its tsetse-infested zone. These horses promptly fell ill and perished. He collected local tsetse flies and used them to infect healthy animals in a fly-free zone. These animals likewise contracted bovine spongiform encephalopathy. The chain of evidence was thus complete. That tsetse fly was the vector, the protozoan was the causative agent. This foundational medical discovery first demonstrated that insects could transmit protozoan diseases to mammals. Yet his research remained confined to animals. The great enigma of human infection remained unsolved. 1902, the Royal Society in London, alarmed by horrific reports from Uganda, dispatched the Sleeping Sickness Investigation Committee. The first team, misled by erroneous clues, mistakenly identified a type of worm as the culprit. The epidemic continued to rage. In 1903, the Royal Society dispatched David Bruce. He and Mary arrived at the dying town of Entebbe on the shores of Lake Victoria. The place had become an open miners' air hospital. Patients at every stage of the disease littered the streets and alleys. Italian physician Aldo Castiglione joined Bruce's team. Castiglione had previously identified trypanosomiasis in the spinal fluid of 5 patients, but remained cautious, uncertain whether they were the primary cause or a secondary infection. When Bruce examined Castiglione's slides, he instantly recognized these as the very pathogens he had discovered in cattle infected with rinderpest in the Zulu region. The spectre was identical, only the host differed. Bruce threw himself into the research with astonishing vigor. The team performed serial lumbar punctures on patients. Trypanosomiasis were extracted from the cerebrospinous fluid of late minor stage sleeping sickness patients in almost every instance. In early minor stage patients, they similarly detected trypanosomiasis in blood and enlarged lymph nodes. The evidence was irrefutable. Bruce then replicated another aspect of his Zulu experiments, testing for trypanosomiasis in the cerebrospinous fluid of late minor stage patients. In advanced cases of sleeping sickness, they detected the parasites in the cerebrospinous fluid almost every time. In early minor stage patients, they found them in blood samples and enlarged lymph nodes. The evidence was irrefutable. Subsequently, he replicated the Zulu region experiments. He mapped the transmission patterns of sleeping sickness within Uganda. Then he mapped the distribution of tsetse flies in the region. The two maps aligned perfectly. Where the flies thrived, patients were widespread. Where the flies were absent, the people remained unharmed. By the end of 1903, Bruce had definitively elucidated the complete chain of transmission. An infected individual is bitten by a tsetse fly. The fly ingests the trypanosomiasis with its blood meal. The parasites multiply within the fly. Upon biting a healthy person, the fly injects the trypanosomiasis into their bloodstream. The parasites first proliferate in the blood, causing fever and fatigue. Crucially, they then breach the blood-brain barrier and invade the central nervous system. At this point, the spectre truly takes possession of the body. Invasion of the cerebrospinous fluid leads to devastating neurological symptoms: personality disorder, confusion, uncontrollable drowsiness, tremors and convulsions, paralysis of limbs, ultimately descending into coma until death. The spectre was finally unmasked. It was Trypanosoma brucei, a mystery that had baffled explorers and stumped doctors for a century. It was unraveled within months in a modest laboratory in Entebbe. Yet identifying the culprit proved vastly different from containing the catastrophe. The discovery only deepened the dread. They now understood that every one of the thousands of sleeping individuals had become a reservoir for the parasite, a source of infection propagated by mosquitoes and flies. The authorities' sole recourse was isolation and relocation. The brutal strategy once enforced along Lake Victoria's shores. What was urgently needed was an antidote, what the great chemist Paul Ehrlich termed a wonder drug, a chemical agent capable of eradicating parasites without harming humans. This quest marked the dawn of modern chemotherapy. The initial weapon was, fittingly, poison. Arsenic's antibacterial properties were long known. Researchers began experimenting with arsenic compounds. Among the most promising yet notoriously dangerous was a drug called arsenic-free arsenic. This name stands as a darkly optimistic marketing masterpiece, intended to suggest reduced toxicity, yet the reality proved otherwise. Arsenic-free arsenic possessed extreme toxicity. Its use was akin to a life minus or minus death gamble. Doctors had to master precise dosing to eliminate the parasites while preventing the arsenic from destroying the optic nerves, causing permanent blindness or irreversible damage to the kidneys and liver. Colonial doctors began administering A2SYL and other arsenic preparations to thousands of patients. This constituted a brutal and desperate medical approach. For early patients, the drugs worked. The parasites were eradicated. Lives were saved. But for the majority, the treatment itself became a second help. Though they escaped the disease, they were condemned to blindness. As for late-stage patients, once the parasites invaded the central nervous system, arsenic triazolate proved nearly useless. It could not effectively penetrate the blood-brain barrier. Once the parasites laid dormant within the sanctuary of the brain, they could evade the initial chemical assault. The quest to uncover the cause was a truly remarkable feat, a triumph of reason. Yet the quest for a cure has only just begun. This long, dark road is strewn with toxic chemicals and agonizing choices, bearing witness to the parasite's terrifying resilience. It is this very resilience that has brought empires to their knees. The body was once a fortress, blood a surging river, patrolled by sentinels. Yet the parasite, the trypanomos, proved a cunning rebel, swimming through the bloodstream, constantly changing its guise, repeatedly altering its protein profile to evade capture. It played hide and seek within the blood currents. For months, even years, the patient experienced only recurring fevers, headaches, general malaise, and aching joints. These common symptoms are easily overlooked, yet the parasite multiplies relentlessly, biding its time, seeking passage to the innermost citadel, that command center of self-awareness. It charts a course straight to the brain. The brain does not float defenseless. It is guarded by an exquisite structure, a border post of microscopic precision, the blood-brain barrier. This is no fortress of stone and brick, but a living, breathing barrier woven cells, so tightly woven that few can breach it. Without the proper credentials, nothing can pass. This barrier safeguards the intricate chemistry of our thoughts, protecting it from the body's chaotic disturbances. Trypanomoses are gifted smugglers. They swim towards this sealed frontier, biding their time. Scientists still seek its precise route. Some believe it deceived the sentinels escorted across. Others witness it under the microscope, squeezing through tightly packed cells. Its slender form contorts like a phantom passing through walls. Still others speculate it builds its own bridge, releasing chemicals to create a temporary leak in the barrier, just enough for it to slip through. However the breakthrough is achieved, the moment of ultimate breakthrough, crossing the boundary signifies the beginning of the end. The disease enters its second phase. The fortress has fallen. Once within the cerebrospinous fluid, that clear, tranquil sea enveloping brain and spinal cord, the parasite has truly reached its destination. Here it evades most immune patrols, commencing not with bullet-like violence, but with slow poison, patience and corrosion. The brain's sole defense mechanism. Inflammation. Neuronal support cells sound the alarm, releasing a torrent of chemicals, messengers of the body's panic. This should be defensive firepower, aimed at scorching the invader. Yet within the CNSs, the blaze spirals out of control. Friendly fire consumes the very home it ought to protect. Brain tissue swells. The patient's headache escalates from a nuisance to a dizzying, unrelenting torment. Then the parasite unleashes its most notorious act, the theft of time. Deep within the hypothalamus, the biological clock governing life's rhythms operates silently. This intricate biomechanical device dictates when we tire and when we wake, binding us to the sun, the conductor of the circadian symphony. Trypanosomiasism, the inflammation they induce, like blades dismantling clockwork gears, dismantle the cycle of sleep and wake signals, tooth by tooth. Fatigue and alertness. It is inextricably linked to the sun, this conductor of the circadian symphony. Trypanosomiasism, the inflammation they induce, are dismantling the gears of this clock. One by one, the sleep-wake cycle gradually disintegrates. Nights are filled with restless tossing and turning. The mind finds no switch to turn off. Daytime sinks into an irresistible fog of lethargy. Farmers stand asleep while tilling the fields. Women drift off while stirring stews over the hearth. These are not refreshing naps, they are stolen fragments of time, confusing gaps in memory, awakening in bewilderment, no recollection of the respite. Sleep becomes fragmented, like shards of broken glass reflecting critically. Day and night merge until distinction fades. As weeks turn into months, the damage deepens. Inflammation corrodes all things. Personality, that exquisite tapestry woven from memory, desire, and habit, begins to unravel. Once cheerful souls grow irritable, frequently prone to sudden outbursts. The quiet contemplative may turn frenzied. Words pour forth like a flood. Nothing but fragmented thoughts. More common is the slow, silent attrition. An apathetic gloom descends unnoticed. Joy, sorrow, fear, all dissolve into monotonous grey notes of indifference. The face becomes a sagging, hollow mask. Eyes dim and lifeless. The body's functions begin to break down. Muscle control gradually fades. First, the hands tremble. Gait becomes clumsy and unsteady. Speech grows indistinct. Words tangle on the tip of the tongue, as if the brain can no longer send clear commands to the mouth. The patient drools incessantly. Swallowing becomes difficult. They remain among the living, yet fade away day by day. Each day diminishes them a little more. It is this very state that gives the disease its name, the ultimate terror of slumber. The patient becomes a spectre within their own shell, capable of sitting and staring into the void for hours. If you call out, perhaps you might elicit a flicker of recognition, a sluggish turn of the head, but more often there is no response. They are imprisoned within a cage of malfunctioning neurons, ultimately descending into a coma, from which there is no return. Life may persist for weeks, or even months, wasting away. Amidst hunger and infection, the heart still beats, the lungs still breathe, but the soul has long since departed. The parasite consumes consciousness from within, leaving only an empty shell and the echo of death. When death arrives, it is but a silent release, the ceremonial conclusion of a process long completed. The slow self, minus extinction, makes observers shudder, for it is not merely the disease that destroys the body, but also the soul minus stealing thief, plucking away fragments of spirit one by one, until only an empty vessel remains for burial. Early 20th century, when plague ravaged communities, this dreadful descent was an incurable fate. Diagnosis was akin to a death sentence, yet execution was characterized by cruel delay. The sole suspense lay in when the spectre would utterly abandon the shell. The quest for antidotes became a journey into despair, delving into the dark heart of pharmacology, where the line between medicine and poison was scarcely discernible. Before antibiotics were discovered, physicians countered microbial invasion with heavy metals. Mercury treated syphilis, antimony treated leishmaniasis. Yet for trypanosomiasis, the sole hope rested upon the most notorious arsenic. Its principle was simple and brutal. German pioneer Paul Ehrlich termed it the search for the magic bullet, a compound potent enough to kill parasites while sparing the patient. This was a terrifying calculation, demanding that patients, already weakened by illness, ingest known toxins, in the hope that their own bodily functions would prove more resilient than the parasites within, sufficient to kill the parasites, yet selective enough to spare the patient's life. It was a terrifying gamble, demanding that patients, already weakened by disease, ingest known poisons, in the hope that their bodies would prove more resilient than the parasites within. The first arsenic preparations, hailed as antidotes, were celebrated as miracles. Their very naming constituted a marketing masterpiece. Yet it was a lie. Antidote implied non-minus toxicity. In reality, it was highly toxic. While it could suppress the parasites, its margin for error was razor-minus thin. A slightly lower dose, the parasite would survive. A slightly higher dose would destroy the optic nerve, plunging the patient into permanent darkness. Though blindness was an acceptable side effect, ITSYL and its successors possessed a fatal flaw. They could not penetrate the blood-minus-brain barrier, leaving them powerless against the parasite's second-minus stage infestation of the nervous system. They could purify the blood, yet could not reach the parasite's final refuge. This ghost in the machine remained elusive for decades. Thus, a late minor stage sleeping sickness diagnosis equated to a death sentence. Amidst the aftermath of the Second World War, as the world embraced chemical innovation, Swiss tropical medicine specialist Ernst Friedheim defied the odds. He was obsessed with harnessing arsenic, convinced he could transform it into a more precise weapon. In his laboratory, he synthesized novel compounds by combining arsenic compounds with dithiopyridine. This substance, dubbed British Agent Lewis, was itself a remarkable chemical, serving as an antidote to arsenic-based chemical warfare agents. Thus, within this dark alchemy, he forged the first effective treatment for late minor stage sleeping sickness, named trimeth, a arsenic phosphate. To comprehend triosnophosphate is to grasp despair. This was no gentle remedy, but a chemical sledgehammer. The drug presented as an oily, viscous liquid, highly irritant to tissue, administered solely via intravenous injection. Patients required 3 to 4 injections within a month, maintaining complete stillness as the thick liquid slowly entered their veins. The injection process itself is excruciatingly painful, with a burning agony radiating up the arm. Side effects erupt immediately: high fever, vomiting, and severe abdominal pain. Yet this is merely the beginning. The true peril lies in the drug's assault upon the brain. Unlike its predecessors, neosulfide penetrates the blood-brain barrier, flooding the central nervous system to eliminate millions of parasites. As the parasites perish, their bodies disintegrate, releasing vast quantities of foreign proteins and toxins into an already inflamed brain. The patient's immune system, long battered yet persistently defeated, now confronts this surging tide of debris and descends into panic. It launches a catastrophic overreaction, resulting in what doctors term reactive encephalopathy. Intracranial inflammation erupts. Brain tissue, with nowhere to expand, violently impacts the skull. For the patient, this experience is nothing short of a nightmare. Within a week of the first injection, intense headaches and high fever follow one after another. Then come the convulsive episodes. The body arches and convulses uncontrollably, followed by delirium and eventual coma. The brain is burning itself. Doctors could only stand by, offering supportive care, and pray the storm would pass. Yet for most, the storm never abated. The data was stark, even under strict hospital supervision. Mercot pu minus dehydro minus to minus, ruexo minus 1 minus beer imidine minus, from minus carboxylic acid still claimed the lives of 3% to 5% of patients. 1 in 20 who sought treatment died. In poorly managed rural areas, the mortality rate could reach 10%. Consider this choice: watching a loved one fade before your eyes, consciousness dissolving, the body failing. Without treatment, death is inevitable, a slow, silent, and dignified descent into coma. The only alternative is an injection of an arsenic derivative, a highly toxic substance requiring meticulous handling. Yet such aggressive treatment risks triggering fatal cerebral convulsions. This is the harrowing daily bargain in clinics across tropical Africa. The needle bears both hope and destruction. Doctors call this reaction arsenic encephalitis. The term reveals a terrible paradox: extinguishing fire with a fiercer, more unpredictable blaze. For nearly 5 decades, this has been almost the only effective weapon. For thousands of survivors, it is nothing short of a miracle. The fog lifts from their minds. Their bodies regain strength, drawn back from death's door. Yet for every 19 saved, 1 perishes. The final, cruel casualties in this war against parasites. They die not of disease, but of despair and agonizing treatment. They brutal. The therapy's existence fundamentally altered the problem's nature. Sleeping sickness ceased being mere helpless witness to death. it evolved into a colossal logistical, political and social challenge. This disease could be conquered. From the early to mid-20th century, European colonial authorities possessed the power, resources, and will to combat it. For the French in equatorial Africa, the Belgians in the Congo, and the British in Ugandan and Tanzania, sleeping sickness was not merely a humanitarian crisis. It was an economic and administrative catastrophe. It decimated populations in fertile regions, destroying the labor force, leaving territories ungovernable and utterly unproductive. Thus the colonial powers declared war. But this was not a war fought with soldiers and rifles. It was a contest between doctors, microscopes, syringes, and rigorous, systematic public health policies. The latter often involved coercive measures. Its flagship was the mobile medical unit. The French perfected this model. It was not merely doctors visiting patients. It was a self-contained, quasi-military public health unit. Convoys laden with personnel, equipment, and archives thundered into the territory, establishing field command posts, implementing comprehensive surveillance and thorough treatment. Local chieftains were ordered to assemble every man, woman, and child in the village at a designated open space on a specified date. Absence was not an option. The scene unfolded as an industrial minor-scale human processing operation. Long queues snaked across the dusty ground, winding through the dust as people waited for examination. The process was swift and systematic. Clerks first conducted a census, recording names, ages, and familial relationships in ledgers. This constituted not merely medical documentation, but colonial minor-style bookkeeping, rendering the populace legible and controllable. Physical examinations followed. Doctors or medical assistants palpated each individual's neck, searching for characteristic lymph node enlargement, the classic winter throat sign, a potent indicator of early infection. Suspect cases were immediately isolated. For suspected late minor stage cases or individuals screened from high minus prevalence areas, the most dreaded procedure followed. Lumbar punctures were performed in makeshift tents or beneath large trees. Examinees had to bend over or curl up on mats. Long needles were inserted into the lumbar space to extract cerebrospinous fluid samples. This field procedure, lacking modern equipment, was painful and terrifying, especially for children. The collected fluid was sent to field laboratories and examined under portable microscopes to observe the writhing, contorted forms of the trypanosomiasis. Diagnoses were rendered instantly. Absolute results were immediately recorded in ledgers. Positive, negative, phase 1. Fate hinged on what the microscope revealed. The lives of those confirmed positive were forever altered. The core principle was breaking the chain of transmission. Human populations were regarded as reservoirs of pathogens. Infected individuals posed a threat to entire communities. Therefore, isolation was imperative. Colonial authorities established special camps, sometimes termed quarantine camps. More chillingly, they were named after medieval leper colonies or ATS. Patients were forcibly removed from villages, separated from families and farmlands, imprisoned for months during treatment. These camps were grotesque hybrids of hospital and prison, encircled by barbed wire, gates guarded by sentries. Life within was strictly regimented. Scheduled meals, inspections, and the agonizing administration of thallium later replaced by methyl arsenic. Medicine, inherently benevolent, yet confinement stripped individuals of liberty, severed ties to the land, and erased social standing. Reduced to patient numbers and ledgers, regarded as disease vessels to be managed. This war unfolded simultaneously on a second front, not only combating parasites within the human body, but also eradicating the vector, the tsetse fly. Colonial authorities launched a massive environmental remodeling campaign aimed at destroying the fly's habitat, the core principle being Tsetse flies require cool, damp environments to survive and reproduce. The solution was to eliminate shade. This operation, dubbed jungle clearing, unfolded along riverbanks, around waterholes, and near villages. Across thousands of square kilometers, entire ecosystems were razed to the ground. Armies of local laborers conscripted by the colonial authorities wielded axes and machetes, clearing forests, stripping away scrub, and defoliating riverbanks, transforming lush woodlands into sun-scorched open plains, where tsetse flies could not survive. The scale of clearing in the Belgian Congo and French equatorial Africa was staggering. Extensive protective corridors work around settlements and along transport routes. This ecological warfare reshaped the landscape. In other regions, particularly British-controlled territories like Tanzania and Uganda, the strategy proved even more extreme. Observations revealed that tsetse flies preyed on wild animals. Buffalo, antelope, warthogs, which were identified as natural hosts for the parasites. A cold ecological calculation yielded a simple solution: eliminate the animals. Observations revealed tsetse flies feeding upon beasts. Buffalo, antelope, warthog. These animals were identified as natural hosts for the parasite. A cold ecological calculation yielded a simple solution: eradicate the hosts. Colonial governments organized and sanctioned large-scale beast hunts. Hundreds of thousands of animals were shot by gamekeepers and commissioned hunters in an attempt to starve out the tsetse fly population. These operations were systematically documented in official reports that read like battlefield statistics. Thousands of wildebeest exterminated, hundreds of bush bucks annihilated. These colossal campaigns epitomized the colonial mindset in multiple respects. By synthesizing Western scientific knowledge, vast administrative power, and utter disregard for the will of the colonized, their objective was to impose an order of rational hygiene upon an African continent perceived as chaotic and diseased. From the 1930s to the 1960s, this campaign against sleeping sickness achieved remarkable success. The epidemic was contained. Incidence rate plummeted. Millions of lives were saved. Yet this victory was achieved through coercive means. It entailed social isolation enforced by force, radical and often destructive alterations to the natural environment. This war against sleeping sickness was both a war against parasites and a rehearsal for absolute power. It left a profound and complex legacy upon the people and land it sought to save. The spectre of disease was banished, but the spectre of the campaign waged against it lingered longer. This grand colonial project, though deeply sinister, was an engineering of order. Cruel, obsessive, geometrical. It drew boundaries upon the map where none had existed, built trailways through impenetrable forests, imposed order upon society through its own sinister and systematic means. By the mid-20th century, the pandemic that had emptied the valleys had become memory, a tale told by elders. Mid-20th century, the pandemic that once emptied the valleys was now a memory, surviving only in the oral legends of elders. Mobile medical teams became the norm. Land Rover trucks kicked up dust on remote tracks, relentlessly advancing systematic screening. Village-by-village surveys, lymph node palpation, microscope slides. This vast public health machine spanning the continent, lubricated by colonial budgets, driven by a rigid hierarchy, driving the parasite back into its ancient reservoirs, those silent corners of forest and riverbank, where it had always lurked. By 1960, new cases reported across the entire African continent numbered fewer than 5,000. A truly astonishing triumph. The spectre seemed utterly vanquished. But empires are not eternal. They ebb and flow like the tides. Years after the Second World War, a new wind swept across Africa. London called it the wind of change. Accra, Leopoldville, Dakar called it the wind of liberation. Flag after flag came down. The Union Jack, the French tricolor, the Belgian black, yellow and red, replaced by new banners. The vivid colors of independence symbolized boundless hope and incredible possibility. Yet they also brought profound upheaval. The order, forged through hardship and often by force, began to crumble at the edges. New nations faced a myriad of urgent tasks: building schools, laying roads, forming armies, drafting constitutions, navigating the treacherous waters of the Cold War. With only a few thousand cases of sleeping sickness annually, it naturally did not feature among the priorities. The vast, costly system for combating sleeping sickness, a relic of the colonial era, gradually ground to a halt. European doctors, administrators, and logisticians packed their bags and returned home. Funding streams dried up. Machinery began to rust. On the savannas of newly independent northern Congo, a Land Rover's axle snapped. Spare parts yet to arrive. In a remote angling clinic, a microscope's precision lenses fogged with humidity. No one to repair them. In southern Sudanese hospitals, the pentamidine stockpile had expired. The supply chain had completely fractured. These minute failures were like 1,000 tiny points of decay, blotting the tsetse fly belt. But for the trypanosomiasis, this was precisely an invitation to return 1,000 times over. The parasite paid no heed to changing flag. It lurks in the blood of bushbucks, resides within tsetse fly intestines, vanished after the last screening decade ago. As surveillance crumbled, it began its resurgence. At riverside markets, an infected fly-bitten human, an infidel of shifting allegiances. It lurks in antelope blood, dwells within tsetse guts, existing silently as an asymptomatic carrier. Having evaded the final screening a decade ago, it began its advance as the monitoring system crumbled. A fly-bitten infected individual at the riverside market, transforming into a miniature mobile weapon. Traveling several kilometers, it bit another person. The victim boarded a bus bound for a regional town. The transmission chain, once severed by rigorous screening, is now being forged anew through invisible bonds. In this post-colonial era of political upheaval, the parasite has found its most formidable foe. Kilometers before biting another, the victim traveled by bus to a regional town. Transmission chains once severed by rigorous screening are now being forged anew through invisible bonds. In this post-colonial era of political turmoil, the parasite has found its strongest ally. Following Congo's independence in 1960, chaos, division and civil war ensued. The meticulously constructed Belgian healthcare system evaporated overnight. Mobile medical units disbanded. Archives lost. Personnel scattered. When the nation renamed itself Zaire, under Mobutu's prolonged rule, crises mounted relentlessly. Medical infrastructure beyond the capital deteriorated. The spectre haunted villages along the Congo River once more. People first grew weary, then descended into delirium. Sleeping through daylight, the elders recognized the signs. Sleeping sickness had returned. In Angola, following the War of Independence against Portugal, and even longer, bloodiest civil war erupted, lasting decades. Rural areas became a patchwork of no-go zones controlled by warring factions. Mobile medical teams could not enter. Supplies could not reach. Diseases once nearly eradicated returned, spreading among displaced persons and terrified communities. Medical resources worse ever. The same tragedy replayed during the late 20th century civil war in southern Sudan. The same tragedy unfolded during Idi Amin's tyranny in Uganda's subsequent conflicts. Such upheavals destroyed nations once excellent healthcare systems. Disruption proved the perfect breeding ground for such diseases. Displaced persons migrated across unfamiliar territories, carrying parasites. They dismantled the infrastructure essential for combating the epidemic, rendering remote areas vulnerable to tsetse fly infestations. By the mid-1990s, the region had become completely cut off. The victories of the 1960s became a distant, bitter memory. Case numbers began to rise, not gradually, but exponentially. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. In the mid-1990s, the World Health Organization issued a grave warning. Estimated actual infections could reach 300,000, even 500,000. At that time, the Democratic Republic was plunged into a vortex of violent collapse. The vast plague under Mobutu's regime echoed scenes from the early 20th century. The colonial system had once kept the devil at bay. When the system crumbled, the devil pushed open the door, returning to the world. No longer tales whispered by elders in neighboring huts, but hollow stares bearing witness to a crumbling healthcare system. The few remaining doctors and nurses fought on the front lines, confronting the resurgent plague like a waking nightmare. Now they had but two options. Both drugs for treating advanced neurological symptoms were desperate measures. The first was Sulamint, an old German drug from the 1920s. Though effective, its failure rate was extremely high. The second is the truly effective weapon, arsenic derivative, Mir-Schaefer-OL. This arsenic compound, a chemical weapon from the First World War, is terrifyingly potent. Though it can kill the parasite, it may also take the patient's life. When administered intravenously, patients describe it as liquid fire surging through their veins. The most terrifying side effect, reactive encephalopathy, causes a fatal, violent reaction in the brain. Half the patients perish from this. Overall, 1 in 20 patients treated with ARS, IPY eyes from the treatment itself. Imagine this choice. In a rudimentary clinic in the Congolese countryside, family members bring their loved ones seeking treatment. A mother watches her son slip into terminal coma, knowing full well that without treatment, death is certain. Treatment means poisoning, rolling the dice. A 50% chance of instant death, while explaining to the family, gazing at their faces as the infusion begins. It feels like a prayer. 19 fortunate souls and 1 unfortunate victim. A brutal probability calculation. Sleeping sickness treatment coincides with a new epidemic peak. In this desperate and agonizing situation, better drugs are not merely an urgent necessity, but a profound moral imperative. Then came the extraordinary miracle, not from traditional jungle remedies, but from laboratories dedicated to tropical diseases. A compound called DFMO, developed by a pharmaceutical company in the 1970s. Its name was unremarkable, yet its logic was exquisite. Cancer cells rely on specific enzymes or methite decarboclase for uncontrolled division. DFMO precisely targets this enzyme, severing the cancer cell's fuel supply and bringing its engine to a halt. The company invested millions in research and development, yet trials on colon, brain, and prostate cancers yielded minimal results, showing only a faint to murmurous suppressing effect. This failure in cancer treatment seemed destined to consign the drug to the archive, until one day, scientists unexpectedly discovered this active ingredient in a facial hair reduction cream. This seemingly unrelated skincare product contained components capable of inhibiting cancer cell growth. The active ingredient found unexpected application in facial creams to reduce unwanted facial hair in women. The seemingly discarded drug unexpectedly became a major life-saving remedy. The mysteries of scientific operation remain elusive. While researching the biochemistry of trypanosomiasis at Pace University in New York, Cyrus Batch, a biologist without a medical background, became fascinated by the internal mechanisms of parasites. He observed that trypanosomiasis, much like cancer cells, mastered rapid proliferation, spreading through the human body at astonishing speeds. His intuition prompted a question. Did this parasite also rely on the same ornithine carboclase as fuel for division? He managed to obtain samples of the failed anti-cancer drug DFMO, not for use in human patients, but injected into laboratory mice infected with trypanosomiasis. The drug's effect was astonishing. The parasites vanished from the bloodstream. The mice recovered. This drug, capable of such perfect eradication, had found its true calling, not in combating human tumors, but in fighting protozoa. The news sent ripples through the underfunded field of tropical disease research, becoming a faint glimmer of hope. In 1985, an American female patient contracted the disease in Africa, progressed to the advanced neurological stage, fell into a coma. Treatment with melphalan proved ineffective. Parasite persisted in cerebrospinous fluid. The patient was near death. Doctors sought assistance from the WHO. Approval was granted for compassionate use of the experimental anti-cancer drug DFMO. Following slow intravenous infusion, the intravenous drip was administered. All personnel stood watch. The patient regained consciousness. Confusion dissipated. Fatigue receded. Cerebrospinous fluid tests revealed the parasite had vanished. The therapeutic effect manifested. The dying patient revived. Trials commenced rapidly. The site became overwhelmed. Clinics arrived in succession. Sudan, Congo. The results were identical. Comatose patients, those on the brink of death, awoke, sat up, demanded food, recognized their loved ones, as if fulfilling biblical prophecy. Nurses and local medical staff witnessed countless patients succumbing to arsenic poisoning. The drug was hailed as a resurrection medicine. A miracle descended. Its toxicity far lower than that of the arsenic antidote miosaprol. For Gambian malaria, its efficacy was astonishing. Yet miracles in this world must contend with profit and accounting. Eflunopride is no simple pill. Its complex and costly manufacturing process, coupled with its treatment regimen, presents a logistical nightmare. It requires intravenous infusion 4 times daily, every 6 hours, for 14 consecutive days, with mandatory hospitalization. Professional personnel, sterile equipment, and other supplies are severely scarce, precisely where the drug is most needed. The primary market is the world's poorest populations. They reside in nations ravaged by war and economic collapse. In the mid-1990s, the company inheriting the drug underwent corporate mergers. After weighing production costs against negligible sales revenue, decided to discontinue production. The demise of this resurrection drug nearly extinguished the last hope for tens of thousands of dying patients at the forefront of modern medicine. The discontinuation of elfenite sent shockwaves through humanitarian circles. The World Health Organization emerged as a pivotal force in global health. Medicine Sans Frontiers resolved to partner with the WHO in launching a public advocacy campaign. They conveyed a simple yet powerful message. A cure existed, yet production ceased due to lack of profitability. By sharing stories of patients and doctors facing agonizing dilemmas, the crisis was given a human face. Media spotlight ignited a public relations crisis. Under mounting pressure, a landmark agreement was reached in 2001. Sanofi agreed to resume production, donating 5 years' worth of supplies. WHO pledged $60 million and transferred manufacturing technology to other producers to secure future supply. This pivotal victory marked not an endpoint, not merely for sleeping sickness sufferers, but for the very survival of the essential medicines concept, demonstrating how alliances, philanthropists, NGOs and international bodies could defy cold market logic. The drug's revival saved lives, yet the true challenge of saving populations had only just begun, requiring a new generation of mobile medical teams to return to desolate regions abandoned decades earlier by colonial systems. At the dawn of the new millennium, the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo was dire. In some regions, the disease prevalence reached 70%. Entire villages were deserted. Fields lay barren and silent. An eerie, oppressive stillness hung over the land. Here, the Coalition for the New Front gathered. They partnered with the National Sleeping Sickness Control Program, operating with support from underfunded local governments and international partners. Non-governmental organizations such as the World Health Organization and Medicines Sans Frontiers adopted direct intervention strategies, revamping the modern mobile medical team model, proactively seeking out patients. The logic was simple. We could not wait for patients to come to us. We had to take the initiative. Patients often only sought clinic help when their condition had deteriorated to the second neurological stage. By then, the optimal treatment window had already been missed. We had to take the initiative. They penetrate remote, forgotten corners to hunt for the parasite hiding places. People may not even realize they are infected. Consider the logistics team. Over a dozen nurses, laboratory technicians, and support staff converge in the provincial capital. Their destination: villages along tributaries of the Congo River, weeks' journey away. Long wooden rafts are laden with equipment, medical kits, generators, fuel, tents, and provisions. Crucial refrigerated boxes, layered with ice, protect fragile reagents. The upstream journey is slow and depressive. The air is stiflingly humid, like a steamer. Every village the team passes knows the disease's ravages. As they venture deeper into the hinterland, they arrive like specters. The primary task is rebuilding trust. These villages have endured decades of war and neglect. Outsiders are met with inherent weariness. The team leader visits village chiefs and elders, explaining their mission to discuss sleeping sickness and request permission to establish clinics, typically housed in churches or schools, or sometimes merely under a mango tree's shade. Once word spread, screening commenced at dawn the following day. The clinic center was hushed. As work proceeded methodically, a generator hummed softly, powering small centrifuges and refrigerators. People queued in orderly lines. The first step involved a simple blood draw, using a lancer to prick the fingertip. A drop of blood was placed onto a white card. The coagulation test, CATT, is the miracle of sleeping sickness diagnosis. Simply add reagent. Gently shake the card for 5 minutes. Blue granules coalesce into distinct blue spots. If granules are evenly distributed, the result is negative. The subject is healthy. If granules cluster into a clear blue spot, the result is positive, indicating antibodies are present. Trypanosomiasisexplained parasites exist. Whenever a positive C8E2 result appears, medical staff fall into a moment of tense silence. Though not a definitive diagnosis, it serves as a critical indicator. The subject is taken aside, and the result is explained in hushed tones. Further tests are required to confirm parasite presence and, crucially, determine the disease stage. If the parasites have breached the blood-brain barrier and invaded the cerebrospinous fluid, a lumbar puncture is necessary to extract a sample. Without electricity or running water, the procedure demands consummate skill and strict adherence to aseptic protocols, fostering profound trust. The patient bends forward as the nurse locates the precise interorbital space. The needle tip penetrates, and several drops of clear cerebrospinous fluid emerge, moistening the spinal cord. The sample is collected into a reagent vial. In the emergency laboratory, technicians use a portable microscope on a folding stand to stain the sample. Peering through the eyepiece, they search for the microscopic crescent-shaped motile organism. Trypanosomiasis confirmed. Second stage disease progression. Ghostly machinery. Day after day. Modern frontline. Slow, arduous screening. Diagnosis merely the beginning. Treatment in the early 2000 seconds meant transporting patients to hospitals, often requiring days of boat travel. Further distances necessitated persuading patients to leave family farms for 2 weeks to receive 14 days of intravenous flunopyramide injection, meaning hospital stays filled with discomfort and uncertainty. This resurrection drug, hailed as miraculous, yet demanded slow treatment. 2009 saw a major breakthrough announced. The Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative D and DI launched 10 Efrutimmo-X combined therapy NECT, combining efluvcacinum with another drug, and Efrutimmo-X. This simplified and shortened treatment cycles, reducing infusion frequency and hospital stays with marked efficacy. It proved effective even against parasites exhibiting resistance to evasions. NECT emerged as the new gold standard, streamlining logistical support and treatment implementation. Ground medical teams maintained continuous mobile clinics, year after year, penetrating conflict and along riverbanks and dirt miners track networks. They negotiated access with government forces, rebels, and militias. Neutral barrier screens hundreds of thousands annually, providing immediate treatment to confirmed cases, breaking transmission chains, depleting human hosts fought tsetse flies, achieving immediate impact. Incidence rates of approximately 500,000 cases in the late 1990s had fallen to below 10,000 by autumn 2009, a milestone unseen for decades. First dipped below 1,000 cases recorded in 2018, a new chapter in the struggle. The most revolutionary breakthrough may be the oral medication, ficronidazole. A 10-day course of tablets can be taken at home. No hospitalization required, just a single injection. This signifies the end of lumbar punctures, the end of long journeys for treatment, the end of intravenous drips. This means transforming this dreaded heart-stealing disease into a manageable rural ailment, managed at the front line by local nurses using new tools. It has become the ultimate weapon against the parasite. Though this century-long war is not yet over, the achievements are undeniable. A fragile victory forged through enduring collaboration. The parasite still lurks within animal hosts. Tsetse flies still patrol ancient territories. A threat ever lurking in Africa's politically turbulent heartland. The restless heart of Africa, an eternal threat. Almost fight anew, only to collapse. Healthcare systems neglected once more. Numbers climb again. Front lines, not battle lines, stand vigilant. Laboratory technicians peer through microscopes. Logistics officers wade through water. Nurses explain diagnoses softly. Patients, guardians, and memories cycle through, allowing souls to return. The old campaign against the flies. The roar of violent warfare. Scorched earth tactics, chemical mists drifting over woodlands. Entire ecosystems held hostage. Victories over single insects prove fleeting, though price the poisoning of land. Parasites remain latent. Toxins settle. The flies return. Great. The bitter lessons of the colonial era reveal. Bombing alone cannot subdue the tsetse fly. This insect has woven itself into the very fabric of the landscape, requiring a more subtle dialogue. The new warfare relies not on flames, but on whispers and allure. The breakthrough came not from weaponry, but from that forgotten line of laundry, hanging from the branches, swaying in the African jungle's heatwave, revealing one half a deep royal blue and the other a pure, unadulterated black, an abstract masterpiece. The wild signals captured by tsetse compound eyes are lured precisely by this color. This hue is no accident, but the aesthetic pinnacle of decades of entomologic espionage. Scientists discovered the fly's world differs from ours. Its vision resembles a mosaic. Simple inputs weave intricate textures, outlining vast, captivating forms. Crucially, light at specific wavelength. Through countless field experiments, the great Zimbabwean entomologist John Wall, through tireless work in the 1970s and 80s, began deciphering the tsetse fly's visual language. He discovered that deep blue light holds an almost pathological attraction. Not just any blue, but a deep, vivid blue of the 460 nanometry wavelength band. This hue symbolizes distant water sources, and echoes the shade where large animals such as buffalo rest. The precise reason remains uncertain to this day. The mystery locked away. The fly's tiny ganglion is undeniably drawn to it, swarming towards the black panel. The second trick: tsetse flies, particularly certain species, carry parasites infectious to humans. They seek dark, enclosed spaces to rest and escape the midday sun. Black fabric perfectly mimics shade, becoming an ideal refuge turned trap for the flies. This proves an irresistible law, promising sustenance, followed by rest. The fly spots a vast blue silhouette in the distance, like a lighthouse guiding the green brown landscape, adjusting their flight path. As winging closer, diving towards the dark panel, seeking a landing place to rest. The conversation ends here. The earliest traps were tent-like structures, fabric panels forming walls, guiding flies upwards, collection bottles trapping them, ultimately dying of exhaustion. Bulky yet simpler, deadlier. Impregnated fine mesh, hung with colored cloth. Pyrethroid insecticide. Substance permethrin. Odorless, formless, flies drawn in. Optical illusion. Fatal fallacy. The instant of contact. Antennae brush the mesh. Inner flesh. Inhaling neurotoxin. Cuticle. Absorbs, paralyzing the nervous system. Falling to the ground, convulsing. The silent laundry yard completes its mission. A simple device, revolutionary, inexpensive. A few yards of fabric, some wire, a small amount of mesh, a measured dose of insecticide. Constructed months prior, deployed within the community. Minimal training required, passive demand. Fuel, noisy generators, complex machinery. Merely requires hanging, silent day and night, patiently stinging. These traps are clearing riverbanks and pastures in a slow, orderly manner. Their precision stands in stark contrast to the indiscriminate chemical fogs of old. Blue cloth net traps function like directed weapons, speaking only the language tsetse flies understand. Deep within Uganda's wet forest on Lake Victoria's shores, thousands of cloth nets form a silent protective barrier, encircling villages and fields. The extensive logistical system encompasses mapping fly activity zones, organizing community distribution of materials, and ensuring trap maintenance without diversion for other uses. These apron-like devices constitute a sustainable, intelligent warfare system. Researchers at Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine continually refine the design, miniaturizing the apparatus to enhance its lethality. The medical community has developed a device termed the micro-target. Its highly efficient iteration is even smaller, requiring merely 1 square foot of space, just enough to trigger the blue-black bait, stimulating the flies' innate curiosity. Lower costs enable large scale deployment. 10 micro-targets within 100 meter radius yield exponentially enhanced results. Standing on the Congo River's banks, one sees blue flags dotting the foliage across the water, marking the front line. In this silent, relentless campaign, vector control coexists with nature rather than confronts it, harnessing flies' ancient evolutionary instinct, achieving a devastating solution. This is not brute force, but cunning comprehension, studying the enemy closely, crafting the perfect lure, creating a wholly illusory blue world. The cloth trap stands as history's most elegant, inefficient weapon, a masterpiece in public health, a camouflage feat of applied biology. This forgotten laundry item patiently whittles down the killer's numbers, misleading insects into believing the time to eradicate flies has come. Yet this does not sever the transmission chain entirely. Instead, it sparks countless epidemic hotspots, creating scattered safe zones, exchanging them for a precisely measured respite. For another front is brewing a fiercer offensive. Global clinics and laboratories are now in full pursuit of the spectre lurking within the human blood jungle. At the turn of the millennium, sleeping sickness returned to the world stage. This affliction, once forgotten by colonial surveillance system, spiraled out of control over decades of independence wars and post-war neglect, persisting in quiet spread along the peripheries. Throughout the 1990s, the World Health Organization witnessed this catastrophe unfold in slow motion. Official figures already sounded the alarm: 40,000 confirmed cases annually. Yet the reality far exceeded these numbers. The epidemic raged unrecorded in war-or Democratic Republic of Congo, remote Angola, and the corners of South Sudan. Actual infections may have approached 300,000, perhaps even 500,000. This silent plague ravaged communities, yet no alarm was sounded to the world. AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, sleeping sickness, the specters of these former scourges now became present-day horrors. Healthcare workers battled on the front lines, diagnosing stage to neurological symptoms with primitive tools. Lumbar punctures and spinal taps were routinely performed in the most rudimentary condition. Village school rooms, churches beneath mango trees. Treatment for advanced disease is brutal. The standard therapy, the arsenic compound miflucine, carries a mortality rate of 1 in 20. Doctors and patients face desperate choices. Medicines are increasingly scarce. Pharmaceutical companies halt production for commercial profit. The lifeline for the world's poorest populations is on the verge of breaking. Against this backdrop of despair, an extraordinary alliance began to form following the 1995 World Health Assembly resolution declaring malaria's resurgence a major public health crisis. In 2001, the World Health Organization joined forces with a handful of non-governmental organizations, including Medicine Sans for years, to launch an ambitious new initiative. The objectives were grand: to reverse the epidemic's trajectory, to make the disease manageable once more, and ultimately to drive its eradication. The pivotal breakthrough lay in establishing public-private partnerships. Pharmaceutical giants Aventis later merged into Sanofi and Bayer Healthcare made landmark commitments, providing core anti-malarial drugs free of charge, securing long-term production of urgently needed piperacquine and sodium arsenate, and donating the critical drug eflunoprid. WHO provided logistical support. This unlocked the entire chain of action. Yet new challenges arose in succession. Difficulties in drug procurement, obstacles in patient screening, weak distribution systems. The public health campaign was fully mobilized. The 21st century medical force was primarily composed of locally trained personnel. International experts drove deep into endemic areas. Land cruisers, motorcycles, and canoes traversed the terrain. The final few miles were covered on foot. They carried mobile laboratories. Worn metal cases served as their primary weapon. The screening tool was the simple yet elegant biological technology agglutination test, CARD-C8ET, requiring merely a drop of blood from the fingertip. Blood agglutinage upon contact with the reagent. Positive cases required further testing. An entire village's population could be screened by dawn. A task as arduous as finding a needle in a haystack. The work proceeded slowly and meticulously. The weary mobile team arrived at the village, set up the testing station and initiated the process, registering and screening every individual, from swaddled infants to the aged and frail. Those testing positive via C8ET facem or arduous as blood sampling for microscopic analysis, confirming the presence of motor trypanosomiasis. Confirmed cases undergo the dreaded lumbar puncture, witnessing parasites invading the brain. Anxious crowds queue before the makeshift clinic. Laboratory technicians worked with efficiency, their relief palpable. Negative results brought profound relief. Positives felt suffocating. Like the epidemic centers of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the scale of annual screening was staggering. Hundreds of thousands underwent testing. The National Control Program, supported by Belgian development, aided numerous NGOs, who built the nation's fragmented surveillance network established at the grassroots level, deployed fixed treatment centers. Mobile medical teams penetrated regions untouched by doctors for generations, sometimes requiring passage negotiations across dual battle fronts controlled by hostile militias. Amidst the chaos of rampant parasitic infestations, a collapsed nation initiated screening. Scientific treatment achieved a leap forward. Therapy reliant on mefloquine proved terrifying, whilst the recovery drug elfenine offered significantly enhanced safety, yet demanded intravenous infusion 4 times daily every 6 hours, for 14 consecutive days. Patients required a week's hospitalization. Intravenous infusion stands like shackles, placing heavy burdens on fragile healthcare systems and patients' families. The breakthrough lies in combining eflunomide with another drug, NF-13OX, originally developed for treating Chagas disease, a novel combination therapy sharing origins with African sleeping sickness. N-if-13OX mine a C-flunopride combination therapy N-ECT emerged in 2009, revolutionizing treatment protocols. Course shortened to 10 days. Twice minus daily intravenous infusions of eflunopride, supplemented by oral N-if-13OX tablets, proved simpler, safer, and more effective, drastically reducing mortality risks. This achievement stemmed from global collaboration, offering free medication, mass screening, novel diagnostic techniques, and improved treatment protocols. The silent, efficient work, the astonishing curve of the blue fabric net. After 3 decades of rising epidemics, the breakthrough began with a sharp decline in cases. From tens of thousands at the late 1990s peak, reported cases fell below 10,000 for the first time in half a century. Between 2009 and 2015, cases stabilized at around 3,000. In 2018, global new cases fell below 1,000 for the first time, representing a reduction of over 90-5%. Achieving the WHO's 20 elimination target, defined as fewer than 2,000 annual cases, the entire African continent met this goal ahead of schedule. This ancient scourge had ravaged Africa's vast lands for centuries. This victory stems from the persistence of science and partnership. It also embodies the silent courage of thousands of healthcare workers who, day after day, pursued the disease's trail. They drove the disease to the brink. Yet the foundations of this triumph prove strikingly fragile. The parasitic trypanosoma has endured for millennia. Its stealthy nature renders detection challenging. Asymptomatic carriers provide the perfect hiding place. Patients remain symptom-free for months or even years, becoming silent carriers of the pathogen. They go about their lives, traveling, fishing, farming. Each blood sample remains unremarkable. Tsetse flies bite cargo trucks. Tsetse fly parasite spread. The next bite initiates a new chain of infection. Haunting final chapter. Cases plummeted during the sleeping sickness eradication campaign. Expensive, large minor-scale active screening programs became difficult to justify. Mobile medical teams trekked weeks to reach remote villages. Testing 1,000 may yield just 1 case, or perhaps none at all. Ministry of Health budgets remain chronically strained. Other pressing priorities mean higher mortality. Diseases are neglected. The vast surveillance system that once drove down case numbers. Mobile teams gradually disbanded. C8E tests left idle. Expertise steadily eroded. A new generation of healthcare workers grew up in an era untouched by sleeping sickness, misdiagnosed in its early stages, with vague symptoms like fever, headache, and joint pain. Patients are mistakenly treated for malaria, typhoid, or other ailments Unsent home, the parasite continues to multiply, slowly invading the brain. Successfully contained, the disease becomes increasingly rare. We begin to forget, neglect, and overlook it. This forgetfulness creates perfect conditions for its resurgence. It spreads covertly, with small minor-scale asymptomatic carriers acting as smoldering embers. Monitoring in the jungle relaxes. Carriers spread to new areas, and the parasite reappears. Years after declaring eradication, the disease spreads silently, symptoms concealed. Signs of resurgence emerge. 5 to 10 years later, the first patients display classic neurological symptoms: confusion, unsteady gait, daytime somnolence. The first signs of somnolence appear in clinics. A new epidemic has quietly spread. The spectre returns, compounding challenges. A persistent reality. Parasite habitats. Tsetse flies know no borders. Human conflict. Civil war in the Central African Republic. Renewed fighting in eastern Congo. Not merely a humanitarian crisis, but a public health emergency. Decades of progress crumbled. Neglected diseases. Security systems collapsed. Health infrastructure bore the brunt. Screening halted. Treatment centers abandoned and destroyed. Populations displaced, fleeing to forest valleys, ideal breeding grounds for tsetse flies. Here, sleeping sickness persisted. Chaos shrouded the nation. By the time the world noticed, the parasite had mastered adaptation. New treatments like a timely rain. Medical history remains an arms race. Drugs breed new selective pressures. Random mutations in local patients' trypanosomiasis confer resistance. Surviving drug-resistant strains spread and proliferate. The nightmare scenario Ray- emerges. Antibodies develop. First-line antiparasitics therapies fail. We return to dark times. Medicalhistorydocumentary proves ineffective. Treatment options dwindle. Continuous pharmacologic monitoring becomes essential. Initial signs of resistance gradually evolve. The earth-shattering new drug fake Wimazole, the first oral treatment for advanced trypanosomiasis, approved in 2018. Alien marked breakthrough, eliminating the need for intravenous infusions and hospitalization, drastically simplifying treatment protocols and enabling access to remote areas. Yet ultimate victory is merely superior weaponry in an unending battle. Weapons that must remain perpetually operational. The next alert point. The spectre returns. A silent, perpetual mission sustains highly specialist reference laboratories, trains healthcare workers, and safeguards the sentinel surveillance network for neglected diseases. Persuading donors and governments to maintain funding becomes crucial when malaria papers seem to vanish. Embedding sleeping sickness control within primary healthcare empowers village clinic nurses with tools and knowledge. Sentinel surveillance must be remembered. No evidence, no parasites. Missing parasite blood samples. Tsetse flies lurk within humans. A long history of disease cycles. The collapse of control systems stems from waning vigilance after large scale operations. The scourge follows like a shadow. Generations struggle to escape fear, yet ultimately cannot evade destiny. When the world's gaze shifts elsewhere, control systems begin to decay. Now, latent pathogens spread in the shadow of the tsetse fly. Successful containment campaigns inevitably end. The ancient colonials questioning the still air over the Congo basin. Is this truly a different era? Or have lessons finally been learned? Defeating the enemy is not an isolated event, but the norm of perpetual vigilance. Though the spectre has been driven out, it remains unvanquished. Indefinite alertness is required. The slightest lapse plunges us back into slumber.